Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Jeff Peterson analyzes corn and soybean markets. Lauren Giesler looks at foliar fungicide applications in soybeans. Amy Millmier Schmidt explains how livestock producers can use composting to dispose of carcasses. And Kelvin Leibold discusses whether a growing world population will mean increased business for U.S. agriculture. Our market analyst this week is Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners. Opposite Jeff this week is former Market Journal host Doug Jose, as Curtis and I are currently traveling in South America. Over the next few shows, we plan to show you the agricultural landscape in Argentina and in Brazil. The latter is expected to produce a huge soybean crop this year, and our travel itinerary takes us into the country's top soybean-producing state of Mato Grosso. You'll see our reporting from there in the coming episodes. Now for this episode's market analysis, here's Jeff Peterson with Doug Jose.
Jeff, let's talk about soybeans first. They've been the big mover this week. We had a down, and now we've a little bit back up. What's happening with the soybean market?
Yeah, we came into trade on Tuesday, and it was almost like basically a weekend of weather, except it was good weather in South America. Everybody was kind of thinking whether or not Argentina was going to get the rains, and they did pick up some rain. So we come into Tuesday's market, and we were down hard.
I sold some soybeans a little while ago for $12.45, and I thought that was okay, but then 2 days later it was 20 or 30 cents higher, but it's backed off.
It has, and the other question with that is everybody's trying to determine how quickly is Brazil going to get the soybeans out of their ports. You know, we're seeing some harvest start in the very northern areas of Brazil, and the yields sound really good, but now they're trying to make their way to the ports, and the ships are starting to back up, so it looks like we're going to have some logistical problems again in Brazil.
Now, there's some uncertainty with China. Is that another factor here?
You know, it's a big one. It is. The PMI numbers were out, so everybody's looking at their economy and saying how strong are they. But the other part that's really being asked right now is at what point will the demand switch, you know, from China's side? Will they switch away from taking beans from the U.S. and start going to Brazil? We're not there yet. We do expect to see some cancellations. I mean, they've been buying a lot of U.S. beans. We think some of those will be canceled as Brazil starts getting beans flowing out of their ports.
What do you look for in the near term then with soybeans?
Yeah, we think soybeans are going to struggle here. We really think that anything above $13 on the future side is a place that you have to sell. We're concerned that once everybody gets more comfortable with the South American crop, that we're going to start seeing some more pressure go on the old crop beans. The demand has been very good and the stocks are tight, but we don't think that's going to be enough to hold up longer term.
Now, new crop, there's some discounting there because I think a lot of expectation of people switching to beans from corn.
Yeah, there is. That's the big discussion. You know, beans dipped down pretty close to $11 when we saw the old crop pull back. They've kind of came back up a little bit, but everybody for their individual farms is trying to sort out, should I plant corn, should I plant beans? I think when the dust settles, I don't think we're going to see as many acres switch to soybeans as what's being talked about, but there sure is a lot of discussion about it right now.
Now on the corn side, it's a little different situation. There's still a lot of corn out there in the country. Not much has been sold, has there?
You know, there isn't. We came into harvest time as far as the farmer, and he probably only sold about 20% of normal. And I can understand that with the high prices, but he hasn't been selling a lot of corn, you know, since harvest. He's only been selling what he has to, and what that's caused is very good basis levels. So the basis levels locally are very, very strong.
Now, as we go through the rest of the winter here, do you see it's been sort of a sideways move. Is that going to continue?
You know, we've been chopping between about 435 on the top side in March futures and about 406. I think we are going to chop sideways in here until we see the farmer let go of some bushels. Once we either get a little further into the winter and he lets go of some more bushels, we are concerned though that then we'll see some lower prices ahead.
So what's going to motivate some of these sales? I mean, as you mentioned, basis is pretty strong. Probably not going to move there. So what's going to generate some sales?
Yeah, I think what it is I think we're going to reach a time. There's really two things. I think there's going to be a few bills that start coming in. I got some cash rents, maybe some equipment payments that have to be made. So there's going to be a need for cash. But then also, I think everybody here in a month and a half is going to start thinking, planning's just right on the corner, and I don't know if I want to carry these binfuls. So I think before we get into the planting season, we'll see guys start moving some more bushels.
Now, old versus new, price about the same. What do you say about selling new crop?
This is going to be a hard one, and as you sit back and look at these prices, the one thing that we're seeing, Doug, is that I don't think anybody's going to see a price for new crop, whether it be on corn or soybeans, that they like. This is going to be a tough one to sell. But we're really saying on any bounce higher here, we really like to see someone getting close to 50% sold of their insured bushels on both. I think that's a price we just need to get those sales on and get ourselves protected.
Now here locally, new crop is a little bit over $4. So are you saying that's about as good as you can expect?
Yeah, I think this is a year where you want to have flexibility in your marketing plan. I think you need to make some sales to be able to get some protection. But if we would turn hot and dry later, you want to have the ability to come back in and be able to add to that. Maybe have the ability to buy some calls or to have some flexibility that way in your plan.
What about the ethanol market? What's the impact there on corn?
Been a lot of discussion around the ethanol market, in regard to the renewable fuels mandate. But in regard to production, the production was down last week, but a lot of that was attributed. It was very cold in many parts of the country. A lot of snowfall, not much moving. Right. We saw a bounce back this week, and actually we're above the pace right now that's needed to meet USDA's targets. So far, we think that the ethanol demand is going to stay strong.
Jeff, thanks a lot.
You bet. Thank you.
Next week, we'll look at hog markets with University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain. Earlier this month, UNL Extension plant pathologist Lauren Giesler joined us to discuss soybean seed treatment for the upcoming growing season. This week, Lauren is with us again to look at foliar fungicide applications in soybeans. Held each summer and sponsored by Checkoff Dollars from the Nebraska Soybean Board, Soybean Management Field Days update producers on research and disease pressures to help growers make profitable management decisions. One component in these field days has been the use of foliar fungicide applications to soybeans at locations throughout the state. For farmers thinking about input prices for this fall, these applications would cost money, but in some cases, as Lauren has noticed in UNL studies, they can provide a measurable yield boost.
Well, and we've had a wide range of results research-wise on this, Jeff, and we'll see, overall on average, we're in that, 1.6, 1.8 bushel per acre increase with just a fungicide when we're looking at fungicides alone. And then when we're looking at, in some years we've had more than that, some years less. One year where we had 4 locations with soybean management field days, we had about 2.1 bushels with the fungicides when I averaged across all my different fungicide treatments. If I put an insecticide in there, I picked up another 2 bushel. So we were, almost doubling that. And I really think that's a practice that a lot of farmers are trying. If they're using an application, they're looking at, adding in an insecticide, and we can't always explain it.
Right. Were you treating everything, or were you treating only disease areas?
Well, in these particular studies, we would just go out based on a timing, and it wasn't really for disease management. So, as a pathologist,
right.
I tend to think, well, we're not really doing an IPM strategy here. We're not looking at managing anything. But we know that some of the added benefits of these fungicides, all the fungicides on the market that growers are using for the most part have a strobilurin fungicide. And that's the one where they see any added plant health benefits if they occur. And we know that R3, early R4 timing is key to get that result if it's going to happen.
Is there a danger with resistance or buildup if you just apply it for the yield boost?
Well, there's several things there that when we look at resistance potential, surely, we're applying fungicides across a huge number of acres. Nebraska, not only there, across the whole U.S. So is resistance risk there? Absolutely. The things that I see though that really reduce that risk is most growers now are using combination products, and all the companies are coming out with things with different modes of action. So multiple modes of action. That's going to be key for resistance management. The other one is they're usually only making one application. So where we see resistance development, usually it's repeated applications in a growing season with really aggressive diseases. And then the third thing, typically we're making an application and there's very little to no disease present. So you're not exposing a large number of that organism to that fungicide. So when you look at your potential for resistance, it's relatively low, I think, in the environments that we're talking about here where those factors are included. But again, you know, we'd like to see fungicide used for disease management, but hey, if you're going to pick up 2 bushels and then you're going to add these insecticides, a lot of farmers are doing this, and they're getting more than that sometimes. Was it cost effective for you? You mentioned the yield boost that you got, and obviously the price of soybeans is going to make a difference here. Huge. Yeah. So, you know, and now's the time of year a lot of farmers are looking at all these data points out there and saying, am I going to do this or not this coming year? You know, and I would really just encourage our growers, if they have not tried these things, give them a try. If they tried them and they didn't have success, you know, then they know. But again, you know, I encourage people to try it, do it in a way that you can find out if you're going to have a return or not. We know also year makes an effect. I've had years with no results from any locations that it worked. It seems to me that years where we have a lot of stress, you know, like a hard year, like 2012, we didn't have good results at any of our locations. But 2011, that's where we had better results as far as yield increase. So, you know, look at it that way and then make that decision as you're coming into that time. You know, is it a great year for growing soybeans, that conditions are perfect, we're not having super high temperatures, you know, or is it a stressful year? And then that's one of the things I would consider in looking at if I'm going to make that application or not. For more information on foliar fungicide applications in soybeans, you can watch our interview with Purdue University's Kirsten Wise from the World Soybean Research Conference in South Africa. That interview can be found with the July 26th episode from last year. A different option is available to livestock producers disposing of animal carcasses in the form of composting. UNL livestock bioenvironmental engineer Amy Millmier Schmidt says Nebraska used to limit composting of carcasses to animals less than 600 pounds, but that restriction has been removed. Amy says that now allows producers to utilize another technique when managing livestock deaths.
There's usually about 4 options that producers have. They can compost, of course, which we're going to talk about today. Rendering is usually one that most producers will go with. There's also burial and disposal in the landfill. When it comes to composting, how have Nebraska's rules changed to allow for more composting of dead animals? There used to be a restriction on the size of the animal that could be composted. Years ago it was 300 pounds, then it was raised to 600 pounds, and now there's no limit. What would be the impetus or the reason behind someone wanting to compost a dead animal like that rather than just calling the rendering service? The rendering service is rather expensive. There's fewer and fewer plants that are taking animals for rendering, and so even if you can find somebody to take those, it's going to be expensive, and you'll probably have to store dead animals on the site for a while before that truck comes by. And then there's also some disease transfer issues when those trucks are going to multiple sites in a day. Composting, of course, is a very natural process of breaking down the animal with microbial bacteria, and it's certainly less expensive. Most producers probably have everything on their farm that they would need as far as the carbon source and material to build that pile, and the equipment used to turn the pile is, you know, a tractor with a front end loader. Right. So you've done some workshops on this, and one of them was out in Curtis, Nebraska, and you were kind of showing producers how the body would go about decomposing, how they can do some things. What are some of the keys for getting started? What are some of the things that they would need to use this type of technique? Well, for a beef system in particular, they usually will have some manure and waste feed and those sorts of things. So that makes a good mixture for building the pile. And so put down about 24 inches of that material, lay the animal on top, and cover it with another 24 inches of material, and leave it for about 3 months. And after that time period, then they'll turn the pile, leave it for another 3 months, and usually by that time it will be pretty well decomposed. There may be some large bone fragments left, and in that case they would return those to the pile, but the rest of the materials should be ready for land application at that point. Are there any runoff concerns or any environmental things here to keep in mind? Typically, if the pile has a sufficient amount of organic material or envelope material, as we call it, that's surrounding the animal, there won't be any liquids leaching out of it. If there are, then it's a matter of adding some dry material to absorb those. But you know, we usually will recommend that they have a compacted clay or compacted soil base for it that keeps that material from leaching into the ground. And other than that, you know, just watching for any material leaching out of the pile.
Is this a solution maybe for a smaller scale farmer rather than someone who's using a feedlot type of operation? I mean, that could possibly be a lot of animals.
Really, it's certainly acceptable for any size operation. You know, you're looking at, you know, maybe a 2% death loss, so hopefully those larger operations don't have a huge amount of animals that they're having to deal with. In an emergency type situation, then, you know, a huge death loss, then it may not be as reasonable, but, you know, it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's not a high labor intensive operation, and you know, whether they're a small producer with 1 or 2 death losses a month or a larger one with, you know, 5 or 6, it's certainly doable for any size operation.
Amy has recently written an article on the process of composting large animal carcasses. We'll link to that information on the Market Journal website. By the year 2050, the United Nations expects the world will hold about 9.6 billion people, an increase from today's population of about 7.2 billion. However, shifts in fertility rates could have a huge impact, skewing the number by more than 1 billion above or below the estimate. The UN also expects India to surpass China as the world's most populous country around 2028, less than 15 years in the future. To meet the demands of more than 9 billion people, the UN says the world will need to produce 70% more food. As the world's current largest nation, China imported $30 billion worth of agricultural goods from the U.S. alone in 2012, making the United States its largest ag supplier. The U.S. is also China's #1 provider of soybeans, supplying 44% of the total share in 2012. The question for the future is if that success could be replicated in other growing nations. At December's Omaha Ag Outlook at the Old Market Embassy Suites, we talked with Iowa State Extension's farm management specialist Kelvin Leibold about whether a large population increase means more business for U.S. ag goods.
Well, that's the debate that's going on, I think, as we look at some of the issues. First of all, I'm not sure that the 9 billion is actually a given. For example, the Gates Foundation has started to look at birth control in Africa, which is a topic they didn't want to touch before. And as these societies get more wealthy, as was in the United States, we did what? We cut the number of children down dramatically when the demand for labor and the cost of raising children went up. So we may not see that population growth.
So in the U.S., if there was a huge crop, and this year there was a good crop, as you mentioned, on the outskirts, maybe not so much maybe in Iowa where they had some problems. Your concern is that if there was a huge crop, there might be a problem with trying to find markets for it.
Yeah, I think the issue is on both what's the short run look like, what's the intermediate, and what's the long term look like. The short run here, we've gone through an unprecedented year of 5 years of great prices, increased world demand, driven in part by the biofuels, by export demand. Now, what's the next 5 going to bring? We've had some weather problems around the world. We put 40% of the corn into ethanol. When I look at that and I start thinking about, okay, the next 5 years we have a really good crop, we get that trend line yield the crop insurance people have been talking about, we're going to have a lot of corn laying around here, and are we going to be able to ramp up quick enough? Oh sure, we'll have a few more chicken plants, we'll feed some chickens, but they're not going to eat that much. Are we going to build any new ethanol plants? I don't think in today's environment we are. So those are the questions I have. So as corn falls below that $4 number, does it stay there very long? Or does demand actually increase and the hog industry and the other feed industries pick up the slack?
Let's talk about some of the international customers. China's a big one right now. They buy a lot of pork, they buy a lot of soybean meal. Is that something that continues going forward?
Oh, I think definitely that you're going to see a pretty significant shift of that nature keep going there. But keep in mind with corn, China's the world's second largest producer. What's their national corn yield? Well, it's only about 90 bushel an acre. Could they ramp that up? Sure they could. They could ramp it up with more fertilizer subsidies, more acres. Oh, they could try to work out a deal with genetic companies and bring in new seed technology. Let the big 3 boys come in and play in their arena, and they turn around and do what? They put 25 bushel an acre yield increase in place. That'll put them what? make them an exporter of corn, not an importer.
Do you think that's likely?
I don't think that's real likely in the short run. Long term, I think yes. They will see a substantial increase in their yields in their country because they'll be forced to.
What role could India play? It's a country that's growing very quickly as well.
Of course, India has a lot of population growth. I think it has a growing middle class. Is that sustainable? Currently, India doesn't import very much. So if they started to import even a little bit of grain, wheat or corn, soybeans, it would have a pretty important impact on the marketplace. That's assuming that places like Russia and Ukraine don't start flooding the market with the little exports of those as well.
Those countries are obviously relevant when it comes to wheat from the U.S. as well, right?
Yeah, we started with high corn prices because we had a national wheat shortage, not because we had a global wheat shortage, not a global corn shortage. And again, they can kind of top things off a little bit with wheat. But what I'm more concerned about is this gradual shift. Just as the United States has shifted away from wheat to corn and soybeans, so are the Soviet Union and Ukraine and other former Soviet Union countries. They're shifting more corn and more soybeans into their rotations as well. Why? Because of the prices and the profits. And technically they're located next to the Black Sea, which makes a short hop to places like Egypt or Iran.
Let's talk about Brazil from the scope of soybeans. Will there be this constant battle between the U.S. produces a crop and they have to get it to market before Brazil produces an even bigger crop?
Yeah, I mean, the world realizes that there's two suppliers now and they're about 6 months apart in their supply system. I can remember the days when we used to talk about Argentina and Brazil together equaling the U.S. soybean crop. Today we're talking about Brazil and the U.S. basically being neck and neck here the way it looks for the next several years on soybean production. So yeah, it is a major factor. Brazil has increased soybean production and the United States has increased soybean production. It's not just them, we both have, along with a few other places around the world.
Could they go more so though in the future? Could Brazil increase faster in that area than the U.S.?
Well, Brazil has got the land conversion issue.
Yeah.
And so how much of this pasture they want to pull out into the soybeans and how economical is it for them to do that. Big factor in Brazil is infrastructure. Do we see an outside player come in and build a good railroad for them? Do we see further investment in their ports so they can load ships faster and quicker and more efficiently? Those are the things that really I think is going to drive Brazil's future.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we plan to show you the agricultural landscapes of Brazil and Argentina over the next few weeks. How important are meat exports to the U.S.? Mark Jagels from Davenport says the value of beef exports represents $249 per head each year. For pork producers, shipments of their products represent $53 per head. The January Nebraska Farmer features Jagels, who is the newly elected chairman of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Jagels has a long history of promoting ag products from the United States and Nebraska. In the January issue of Nebraska Farmer, you can learn more about him and what the U.S. MEF hopes to achieve in 2014. And now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. What a wild week it has been as we've seen a couple cold fronts move through the state, brought high winds and extremely cold temperatures, particularly in our lows as we move to the sub-zero range. Coupled with the winds, we were easily seeing 20 to 30 below zero wind chills. In between the cold shots, of course, we went the other way, completely to the opposite polar end, well above normal temperatures, and that's been the theme the last couple of weeks as we battle between this eastern U.S. trough and the western U.S. ridge. And as each one moves east and west, we see these influxes of cold air come in with the high winds. And it looks like that trend will continue at least into the next week. We do have another Arctic air mass poised to move into our region, particularly as we get into late Sunday and more in the area of Monday and Tuesday. And then we'll start to see temperatures ease somewhat as we move toward next week. So let's take a look at the main forecast and see where we're going to go over this next 7 days. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to, here's that upper air trough that's bringing the very cold air over to the Great Lakes. For Nebraska proper, the ridge from the west is trying to build in, and of course we're seeing our coldest temperatures in the northeast as it's on the backside of this cold air shot coming across the upper Midwest. So we'll be looking at highs probably in the 30s, more toward western Nebraska, closer to the ridge, we'll be looking at temperatures that easily should make it up into the low to mid 50s. Now as we go to tomorrow, what we're going to notice is that trough kind of eases up a little bit, but the upper air low over the Hudson Bay region is going to elongate, and that's going to pivot another piece of energy around it. So this cold front is going to rapidly move through the region as we get into late Sunday afternoon, and we'll see temperatures begin to drop Sunday afternoon, and most likely our highs as we get into Monday with this cold air coming in will be right around midnight, and then as we go through the day our temperatures will continue to drop. I would expect during the daylight hours that we'll see temperatures consistently in the single digits to the north to probably the low to mid-teens across the southwest. Now as we go into Tuesday, most of this cold air will filter in. We'll start to see our winds lighten up somewhat, so the wind chill factors won't be as much of a major problem, but our highs will be consistently in the single digits to the low teens across the state. Now as we go into Wednesday, we start to see this trough weakening, and as it weakens, we're going to start to see some warmer air move into our region. So we should boost our temperatures about 10 degrees on Wednesday. Of course, each of these days with this cold air, we will have the chance for scattered flurries, but there doesn't look to be any significant accumulations. Now as we go into Thursday, we're going to see a trough trying to form to the east, and we'll see ridging pushing in, and that's going to boost our temperatures another 10 or so degrees across the state. So we could be looking at a return to the 40s across the west and possibly pushing the 30s across northeast Nebraska. And as we get into Friday, we start to see a zonal flow. That's going to open up the channel for a storm system coming in that could portend to some snowstorm activity across the central one-third of the United States as we get into the early part of February. So as we look at the temperatures, we will see some fairly nice conditions this weekend, and then things will kind of fall apart Sunday as we see the cold air filtering in, and then as we get into Wednesday we start to see a rebound in temperatures back toward closer to normal by Friday. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates the cold air will remain in place into early February, and we also see the signs of an impending snowstorm that's going to hit somewhere in the central one-third of the United States as we get into early February.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Jeff Peterson, Lauren Giesler, Amy Millmier Schmidt, and Kelvin Leibold are available individually as part of the January 24th episode of Market Journal on our website and through our mobile app. Next week, Ron Plain will be our marketing analyst, and we'll show you the beginning of soybean harvest in South America. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.